So I'm headed off to Bordeaux for a week tomorrow, and I thought before I left Burgundy I would open something neither from Burgundy nor from Bordeaux, and we went with a 1989 Château Rayas. This is one of my favorite wines in the world. A lot of sentimental attachments as well, because it's my birth vintage, one of the best 1989s produced anywhere in the world. It's also the only wine for which I've ever received a student discount. At a restaurant in provincial France where over a decade ago now, the proprietor was kind enough to give me 50% off on the grounds that I was a young person taking an interest in wine. Not enough of that sort of thing happens today, I think. What makes Rayas so special? I mean, this is sort of a fascinating question because for me it's a wine that if Château Rayas just outside of Contreau deserves its own appellation, Rayas surely deserves its own appellation as well, because it's so outside the norms of all other Châteauneuf du Pape. It's a cool site in a very warm appellation. There are none of the galets roulés, the big round stones that characterize, the sort of most photographed terroir of Châteauneuf. It's all sand, which is really punishing for the vines, incidentally. Rayas, vines don't get to be hugely old because the sand is so draining that vines are stressed often. But it's also a particularly idiosyncratic site because it straddles a valley. So you have an exposition that captures the morning sun, an exposition that captures the midday sun, and an exposition that captures the evening sun. I think that when you compare Rayas and Pignon, the other Grenache-based wine from the estate, which has a uniform exposition, I think for me that explains a lot about the sort of plenitude, the aromatic range of Rayas versus Pignon. I think that's an important thing to know about it. One of the reasons it's such a cool site, which allows for a very long maturation on the vine and then a very late harvest, is because the Reynaud family had the sense not to rip up all the forest. The vast majority of the land that they own at Château Rayas is pine forest, and with all manner of other things like lemon thyme and incredible sort of variety of flora growing around it. And as soon as Châteauneuf became successful, people tended to rip up anything that you could plant vines on and plant vines, and that tends to make the whole area hotter. I mean, this is now very fashionable to talk about agroforestry, but Rayas was agroforestry back in 1880 when the Reynaud family bought and started developing vineyards on this site. 100% Grenache, and then quite a long élevage in neutral, very old barrels. Dirty on the outside, but clean on the inside because, this is a region you're talking about often high degrees of sugar, high degrees of alcohol, very high pH for Châteauneuf du Pape. So naturally, any region like that, anywhere in the world, wines are prone to microbiological issues like Brettanomyces. For me, Rayas is normally marked by really pure aromatics. The 89 is extremely pure and sort of very complex, very deep, very powerful wine. I mean, this is a heady, high alcohol wine, but it's still in its prime today. For me, now is a really good time to start opening it, but it's by no means old. And then, then there's some interesting different eras in the history of Rayas to talk about as well, perhaps. I mean, up through 78. It was Louis Reynaud who made the wines, the sort of iconic Rayas wines of the 50s, 60s. They were extremely fine, perfumed, elegant. And he was a very clever guy. He would do things like open the doors of the cellar in the evening to let the cool air in and close them in the morning. And, no need for temperature control, but managing things in an intelligent way. Jacques, his son, took over with the 79 vintage, I think. The boundaries blur because I think Louis was ill, and then Jacques took over, and so on. And he didn't do too much in the way of replanting the vineyard, especially towards the end of his life. So 89, probably talking about a vineyard with quite a lot of missing vines, vines getting old, low yields. And to me, the Jacques era Rayas are a bit more structured, maybe a bit more rustic, you could say, a bit more chunkier, more muscular wines, very concentrated. I mean, 1995 is the poster child of that because it's just inky, immensely concentrated. And I've got a 4-year-old here who wants to get involved in the video. Makes a change from the 1-year-old. So then Emmanuel took over. So Jacques Reynaud had a heart attack and died, I think just after having vinified the 1996 vintage or early in 1997. So 1996 was his last vintage. And then Emmanuel Reynaud, his nephew, took over. Emmanuel seems to have, in some ways, there's a return to the style of Louis a little bit. I mean, they don't like to talk about stylistic differences, because for them the continuity of Rayas is the terroir, and fair enough. But for me, Emmanuel had to do a bit of replanting. But to me, the wines also became a bit sort of supple, a bit less extracted, a bit, which allows the sweetness of the fruit that's inherent to late pick Grenache to come through. More enveloping, suppler, and today, I think they're really in their prime. Especially for me today, these days, in cooler vintage like 2008, fantastic. I mean, if anyone wants to know what Rayas is all about, I wouldn't recommend starting with the 1989 because it's not easy to find, and it's, who knows about the provenance. But 2008 is still circulating, and that's a great place. That's a great place to sort of see some of the magic of Rayas and why it's such a singular wine. Really, for me, one of the greatest wines in the world, and one of the wines that I treasure the most in my cellar, that gets harder and harder to replace every time we open a bottle.